All right, I think we are live here. Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Folks are tuning in from today. I'm excited to get started and talk about some Azure blockchain solutions today. I'm joined by Cale, and we will introduce ourselves in just a second as folks are still joining and such. But I just wanted to kick things off just to welcome everyone to be here and chat today. Um, I guess we've been doing more of these kind of like firesides chat styles for a little while now. So, of course, it's going to be a little bit of a more conversational stream, but feel free to ask as many questions as you like, and we'll be sure to answer them in the chat. Today, we're primarily going to be going over three different solutions. We're going to be talking about the Blockchain Development Kit for Ethereum, the Azure Blockchain Service, and Azure Blockchain Workbench. We're not really going to cover some more of the foundational principles of blockchain, but we have a lot of resources out there that we can help share and kind of get you up to speed on that. But we're kind of going to go full on talking about these different products today and do some demos. It's going to be fun. I do also have a link right under me and Cale at that aka.ms/Azure Blockchain Solutions, where you'll find a bunch of resources that we're going to cover today, as well as different links for if you are out here and just getting started with blockchain. Even if you, so everyone, I think will learn something new today. And yeah, I think that is about it. So I'll just do a very quick intro. My name is Meaghan Lewis. I am Microsoft Reactor team. I am a content creator, and I've been focused on blockchain really since I joined Microsoft, which now is just about 8 months ago, so not so long ago. But it's been really great just to be able to learn to work with a lot of great folks like Cale and other product engineers, just to learn and kind of deliver great content, and just to I'm excited to be here, and I'll pass it over to Cale to introduce himself.
Hello, thanks, Megan. And my name's Cale Teeter. I'm a senior engineer on the blockchain engineering team here, and basically been working on blockchain since it's been a thing here at Microsoft. So probably almost 5 years now. And we started off working a lot with Ethereum. We support a lot of other different protocols and things up there, but Ethereum is by far one of the biggest in the enterprise space that we've been working with. And so my background been at Microsoft, 10 years. Been doing programming and development all the time. Used to work, directly with customers doing custom software dev, and then, as things kind of evolved and blockchain came a thing here, I started joining that team and working on that. I worked pretty much on all the products that we're going to talk about today. I've been a part of all of them as we built up, and right now I most heavily focus on the developer experience. So the things that you see for VS Code or Visual Studio or any of those kind of SDK type things, most of that comes from me and my team. But I still work a lot with the Azure Blockchain Service team and even the Blockchain Data Manager team. So happy to be here, and this is new for me. I've not done a Twitch stream before, but I've done a lot of other ones, so this will be interesting.
Yep. Yeah, it'll be fun. And thanks again, Cale, for being here. It's great just to hear about your journey with blockchain and kind of your journey at Microsoft so far. So before we kind of get into just conversations about and demos of the solutions that I've mentioned, I just wanted to start kind of at a higher level just to talk a little bit about the significance of blockchain in today's world. So just a couple questions to get, well, I'll start with one, but have a few questions. So just first, how are we seeing blockchain used more widely today, like today in 2020, as opposed to like maybe even when you started developing, for blockchain 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting when they hear about blockchain, if they've heard of Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of these other ones, they tend to think about cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency being one of the
Right.
primary focus on mostly at Microsoft has been around enterprise use cases, which are much more focused on like a B2B type scenario. So when I say B2B, what I mean is a business to business or like a business to consumer, as opposed to pure cryptocurrency. So, basically when we started, we did a lot of what we call private blockchains, where we would take the protocol, run it inside of customer subscriptions, like where only the customers who wanted to interact with it would. So it wasn't a public facing thing. But that's evolved over time, right? So there's things like Baseline that's been kind of talked about now, which basically is an effort to expose it publicly and get businesses to actually use the public blockchain more to route transactions and things like that. So I would say that it's evolved, right? So it's like the cloud, the same kind of thing. When customers first use it, they're like all scared, like I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm used to having my data here where I can touch it and feel it and all my servers, but now it's up in this cloud thing. And so the same thing I feel like has happened with blockchain, where it's like, they were like, hey, I have to get comfortable with this tech and see how it works, and then I'll be, happy to do like public type things. So that's really the evolution I've seen.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So would you say people are more comfortable with that now, what you just mentioned, with everything being in the cloud and such?
I think so. It just takes time, for people to get comfortable with the tech.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's how things are. So let's talk, I think in particular, like what are some exciting use cases for blockchain? Anything that's particularly exciting to you? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's quite a few use cases out there. I'd say the biggest ones right now that are really hot are things around supply chain. So people hear about supply chain management. You can think of it as an example of like, hey, if we're building or something, the LCD screen comes from a certain component manufacturer, the RAM is coming from a certain manufacturer. All these different pieces come together to make up this product. And you can imagine that there's quite a lot of software that's involved with synchronizing those databases around, hey, I sent you 100 LCD screens, 90, this kind of thing. So over the years, there's been a lot of technology for integration between businesses. And this is where these decentralized tech like Ethereum and some of these things can really be powerful. And I really think the most powerful piece there is reducing complexity of the infrastructure. When people first start with blockchain, they might say, oh my God, there's a lot of encryption. There's a lot of all this like crazy tech I have to learn. And this is way too complicated. But when you really look at it, it's actually simpler than the systems we've built to date, right? Using EDI and some of these other integration mechanisms. Simply what you're saying is, hey, we're going to form a group of companies here who are going to share data. And this data is going to be shared through this mechanism that basically guarantees that we can't cheat and we can't like mess with the data, and we can always guarantee that where our truth is. So I think that's like super powerful with supply chain. I'd say the other big ones are like rewards points or loyalty point systems. You could think of this like, hey, you get airline miles, you get all these different things, these points when you go to the drugstore, all those different things. So there's a lot of merchant communication that's happening behind the scenes for you to swap your airline points for some other points at like a restaurant or something. And so that's a really nice use case for it as well. One that we put live that uses that is Xbox Royalties. So basically EA, Activision, Ubisoft, all these companies who work with us are publishers. The royalties that they're paid are actually powered by blockchain today. And that's how we use that to reduce complexity in that infrastructure.
Awesome. Yeah, those are all great and exciting use cases. I'm happy that you kind of brought up some of the partnerships that we have in-house, particularly. So I guess the next question that I have is, how do these Azure solutions that we built here at Microsoft make a difference with blockchain?
Yeah, I think the big thing that you run into there with blockchain is there's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of kind of middleware services that you really need to make an effective solution, right? Just having a blockchain node that's running and talking to a blockchain is relatively simple to do. But when you start saying, hey, we're going to form a consortium of businesses, and you need something to kind of orchestrate how you're going to do the invites and how you're going to get people into that system, how you're going to spin up the actual nodes themselves, whether they're going to be containerized or running on a bare VM. So obviously the cloud fits perfectly for that, right? It's great for plumbing, right? So for networking, come along with that. So that's one powerful piece that we've seen is the middleware, right? So once I have this thing running, how can I tell like the health of my blockchain? How can I tell when events pop up? I have to integrate with legacy systems. It's not just like, hey, put everything on the blockchain, we're done, we're good to go. It's more like, hey, I already had an existing business system. How am I going to integrate with that thing with this new technology now? So that's a place that we kind of dove into. And then the other place is developer experience, right? I'm pretty passionate about this area. Obviously, I work in it, but it's like, we have services and all these different things that spin up, and we'll show you some of those through the portal today. But I want to make developers productive. I don't want to be like having to bounce to 3 different interfaces, and as soon as I bounce out to a browser, then I'm on Facebook and I'm doing other things. And it's like I want to be focused. I want to stay in my IDE and get my job done. And so that's another area that we kind of focus on.
Exactly. Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Cale. And yeah, we'll definitely, I guess, transition into that now. So yes, let's start to actually talk a little bit more about the blockchain development kit for Ethereum. So if you haven't used it, it's definitely okay. That's what we're here kind of to talk about in demo today. But this development kit is an extension for VS Code that makes it easier to write, test, and deploy Ethereum smart contracts. I've talked a little bit about this in previous streams, but wanted to bring in Cale, of course, the developer who works directly on this experience, to kind of provide an overview and dive into the extension a bit more. Cale, I'll just pass it over to you so we can talk a little bit more about the development kit. Why was it created? What all it can do? Oh, I think we lost you, Cale. Oops. We cannot hear you just yet.
I'm here. Sorry
Okay,
about
there,
that.
you're back. And let me transition over so we can see your screen. Oops, there we go.
Yep, sure. So I'm going to talk through a couple things here. We call this the Blockchain Development Kit. This is the piece I actively work on with Visual Studio Code today. And essentially, you can come up here to this website. We can put this in the chat there. But if you just search for Marketplace for Visual Studio, you'll find it. Search for blockchain, you'll find us. We're right at the top there. So this is the Blockchain Development Kit for Ethereum. Kind of walks through. There's a lot of animated GIFs and kind of like talking you through some of the things we're going to show. It also gives you all the support requirements and all that kind of stuff. It also has our repo, so this is all open source. Everything that we're showing here, let me go ahead and just pop that open, but you can do pull requests out here to everything that we're showing here today. There's nothing proprietary here or any of that kind of stuff. And basically, just talking through a little bit of like what this thing looks like. When you're inside VS Code, which is what I'm showing here right now, you can either go to that website I showed you, or you can click on this little thing over here in the corner, and essentially you can search for stuff in here. So if I search for blockchain in here, you can see there's a bunch of things listed, and you can see our blockchain development kit is right here. I don't have the install button because it's already installed, but you could click the install button there, and it will go ahead and install any of the dependencies required for this. Now, there will be some, right? So there's like Python and some other things that are required to be on your machine. So if you install the extension and you don't have something installed, it'll pop up a requirements page in here and show you that, hey, you don't have this piece installed. And there's been a couple little bumps along the way with specifically we use an older version of Python 2.7. It's not something we use directly, but it's part of a dependency that we have in the extension. Hence, we're kind of like tied to that. But I've heard like from the community that sometimes those have been issues. And if you run into anything kind of weird like that, I will point you in our open source repo up here. If you go into the wiki, and we'll just give this a second to load here. We have an FAQ section in here with some screenshots and things like that to help you through this. Give me a second here. It's logging in.
While that is loading, I'm hearing in the chat that there is some echo, so I'm trying to mute when I'm not talking. I hope that makes it better, and trying to adjust the sound settings, but just let us know how that's going, y'all.
Yeah, so here's the page I was talking about. If you go to the wiki, and basically there's an FAQ here. I go here now, Megan, so just FYI, I'm here a little bit. The FAQs right here. So if you have any issues of like Python or any of the kind of common stuff that happens, we have. Hopefully you won't have any issues. Feel free to open it, jump in there and help if there's anything we can do. Once you have all your dependencies installed over here, I already pre-installed basically a new project here, but I'm going to show you what that entails. You'll see there's a little window. Maybe when you start yours up, it'll just be minimized, but you can open this up, and you can see that we have ways to connect and create new networks here. We'll get to that in a second. But basically, I have a project structure here. How I got that one was if you open the command window here, and to do that, you can just type view or click on view and command palette. There's also hotkeys for Mac and Windows there. And basically, when you pop this open, just type blockchain, and you'll see a whole slew of commands that you can do here. So we have things like building contracts, debugging transactions, all this kind of stuff. The one you want to focus on first is this new Solidity project. So when you click on that, you'll basically get a prompt for, do you want like a basic project, or do you want one from a Truffle box? So Truffle Boxes are a partner we work with. Truffle is the name of the company. They have these pre-built boxes up there that allow you to basically see like things that are already pre-built, like with smart contracts and things in them. So you can use that if you know what that is, and we can put a link over there, but you just go to truffle.com or trufflesuite.com/boxes, and you can see all their boxes. But for now, we'll do the basic project, which is the one I click here. I already clicked it, so we don't have to wait, because it'll basically install some dependencies out here. So we're not going to waste time here waiting for the dependencies. They're already here, so you can see that everything's there. Now, basically, sure, with the configuration, it has some migrations and things set up for you already, and it has some sample smart contracts for you. For those who aren't familiar with Ethereum, a smart contract is basically a chunk of code that's going to run on the Ethereum virtual machine, and this is basically code that once we put it up there, we can kind of guarantee that it hasn't been touched. It will be used to store state, and we'll see state transitions, and that's all part of the kind of blockchain magic. The migrations are basically ways to deploy these into different networks, and we'll show what that looks like here in a second. But basically what we've done is created an experience up here that allows you to do things like context sensitive. Now I just right-clicked on a Solidity smart contract here, and you'll see I got all these options out here like build contracts, deploy contracts, the smart contract interaction, a bunch of things down here around workflow. So what these are all about is basically helping you be productive as a developer, as we said before. I could go download open source tools and use VS Code to compile Solidity smart contracts and all that, but I have to know where all that stuff is, right? And the idea here is we want to make it easy for users who are new to the space, and then we also want to like not get in the way of advanced users, right? So if you never want to use these right clicks and you just want to pop into a terminal window inside VS Code and do everything there, go for it. We're not going to get in your way to do that. But for the guys who don't know how to do that yet, we want to help them as well. So basically, I'll just walk through a little flow here of like how this actually works. So we can do a build contracts here, and what you'll see here is a little window. Contracts thing is popped up down here at the bottom. And eventually what we'll get, and I already pre-built these before as well, we basically get these output files. So if you didn't have a build folder there, you'll see that pop up after the build has happened. And what's contained within inside there is this huge JSON file. What's called an ABI, an interface file that describes all the stuff that's in our smart contract. Really interested in this stuff. You can see the bytecode here. So this is the compiled bytecode of that smart contract that we just did. Basically what we're doing is making sure that you didn't have any syntax errors there. The smart contract that you wrote actually functions and everything works the way it should. Basically what you can do from there, because I want to start using this thing, and you'll see whenever I pop up my deployment here, I have a couple networks here. We'll talk about this one in a little bit, but by default you'll have this development one. If I click on that, after a few seconds, you'll see down here in the status bar, basically our deployment should start. You actually see a prompt here, and then you'll see it in the status bar as well. But basically what's happening now is we're going to take that compiled output, we're going to sign it, and then we're going to use these migration scripts that we have up here. Probably a bit much to get into all the script syntax that we have here. You can go read about that. Happy to point you to some links about that. But by default, we'll set this up for you to kind of do that deployment. Once it's deployed, you see it just went away, and people sometimes go, well, what am I supposed to do? You know. So basically, one thing you can do is you can open up your terminal window here. Basically, there's a terminal. You can just do new terminal, or you can use the hotkeys to do it. And then once you do that, you can basically also pop over to this output window. Click on output. You'll see there's a bunch of things here because of extensions I have installed, but you're looking for the Azure Blockchain. So here's Azure Blockchain, and you'll see, I'll go ahead and expand this a little bit so you can see what's going on. But basically, when I was doing those deployments, this is all the output that was coming back. So I'll scroll up here just a little bit. Actually, it looks like it ran twice here, but there's my migration. So it ran my first migration. Here's the contract address that it went to on the blockchain. And here's all the relevant information about it. If you need to understand some of this stuff or look at it for troubleshooting purposes, you can see all that kind of stuff up there. So what's interesting is you can kind of keep track of this stuff, but again, if you don't care about it, you just want to keep it out of the way, keep it out of the way. Now, I mentioned before, we have this configuration file over here. I'm going to go ahead and wipe something out here for a second. Basically, what I'm going to do here now is show you a little bit about how this connects to different areas. I just want to double check to make sure there's no chat. Is there anything over here, Megan, that we need to address? I just want to double check.
Good so far. I haven't heard anything else about the sound issue since I've been muted. So yeah, I think we're good so far.
Okay, great. Now, one thing you can do here too is you can interact with these smart contracts. Now, we have a smart contract interaction page right here, but I want to show you a low-level way to do it, just so you always have access to be able to do this kind of stuff. So since I deployed it here, I can run some commands here like Truffle console. Now, if I run Truffle console with no other commands, it's going to attach to my development instance that I just deployed that to. And for those who might not have been aware, when I deployed this behind the scenes, there's actually an emulator running inside of VS Code that emulates Ethereum. So basically, you don't even need to be attached to a network. You could be on a plane, you could be disconnected from the internet, and you can basically build and deploy locally so you can see that all your stuff's working. I'll show you, you can actually interact with the smart contract here, and then we could take it up to like a bigger network, like a public network or Azure Blockchain service or something like that. So basically, if you run like basically say something like hello blockchain deployed, and again, maybe you can look at a video. You'll just have to learn over time if you want to do some of these low-level things. But what I'm going to do is look for this state variable called request message here. So there's a state variable. I'm going to call that thing to look at what's in it. And you'll see that we get back hello world. Now, if we look at the smart contract that we did here, we basically have deployed this contract, and in our migration over called hello world that we passed in when we deployed it. So basically, by default, it's setting the request message in this smart contract to hello world, to this string. Now, if we wanted to change it, we can also do that from here. So we can do something like send request, and I'll bring up the source here so you can see what we're doing. But we have like send request, send response here, and you can see it accepts a string. So if I do send request, and then I pass it a string, and let's just say hello Twitch. That's all I'm going to do. You'll see I get a bunch of gobbledygook back here, right? And basically, when I make a state change, which is what I just did there, I said, hey, call this function, which basically is going to update the request message variable, the state inside of the smart contract. Then I get back this transaction hash. Hey, we submitted it to the blockchain, or here's our transaction hash, sorry. That's our transaction ID. And then basically which block number it's going in on the blockchain, how much along with that.
Cale, just a
Now the cool thing is,
anything past return I, like we can't exactly see when you're calling that function, but I think the parts that are cutting off are just where it's calling that request function, and then send request was the second line. I think that may, oh, that's better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And what you are doing is just calling those functions, right? You're just writing some JavaScript here to call those.
That's right. Yeah, very simple. The syntax is a little weird. I'll give you that, but we have a lot of this stuff in our GitHub, and then you can obviously, this is recorded, so you can go back and look at this as well. Okay, so to go on, basically I called a send to change it, and then if I basically do my request message, you can see now whenever I read a blockchain, I get hello Twitch. So I didn't get I got hello blockchain before, now I got hello Twitch. So it's a simple way for you to basically test your smart contracts and be able to see like, everything's functioning there, kind of from a low level.
Very
yeah,
cool.
I think in the other section we'll talk a little bit about Azure Blockchain Service, which uses this view window, but not yet.
was a question that just came up from AlgoCrypt. Where can you view the hash on the blockchain? Um,
Where can you
I'm
view
not
the
sure
hash?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so go ahead.
yeah, you were just showing some of the metadata about this specific block, right? And there was a hash associated with that. I'm not sure if that's what they're asking about specifically. Um,
Yeah, so basically, this hash that you have Ethereum is you submit. So basically, what happened behind the scenes there when I deployed it is I signed my contract, I pushed it up as a transaction onto the blockchain, and then when I called it here, when I made a state change, you notice when I did a read, I didn't get all this gobbledygook back because it's just reading from the blockchain. So the magic of like Truffle and some of the integration we have here knows what contract address to go look for and go read that state variable. So there's no change happening there, so I don't have to submit a transaction. But when I want to make a change to it, I do. And what I get back, this is like basically it's like an async function. So essentially what's happening is when I submitted that transaction, I get back this, hey, if you want to go check the status of that thing, you can go look at this hash. Now, if the question that the listener had here was saying, what can I do with that? You could take a raw Ethereum command line and basically go to the Ethereum blockchain that you deployed this to. In this case, it's local. And you can essentially give it that transaction hash and you can get back the transaction receipt. Then you could dig into the transaction receipt and do all those kind of things. Truffle and some of the tools we built here kind of we call it less hex, more text. So there's less of this address and stuff flying around and more of just seeing what the output is. But certainly, if you want to take that transaction hash and use the Web3 tools or the Geth command line tools, you could totally do that as well.
cool, thanks, Gil. It looks like that answers AlgoCrypt's question.
Awesome. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think that's from a basic standpoint. I just wanted to show like a basic project flow, how you would create a new project, how you would compile it, deploy it. And again, like you wouldn't have to have a lot of blockchain knowledge to be able to do this. But again, if you want to get in here and start tweaking the configurations to do different things, you can totally do that if you like. But we want to make it as easy as possible, low barrier to entry, so that we can get more people developing blockchain solutions.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great point because just by using the extension, you were able to generate all this code. You didn't actually have to write anything just to kind of get this sample smart contract going.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Could you possibly show off the smart contract interaction page? I think that's one of my favorite features. I think maybe that will be helpful at just kind of seeing just another way that you could kind of interact with and call your contract.
We'll try it here. I'll be totally honest, we have an issue open about this right now, but let me see if it's the gods are with us here today. They probably won't be, which I am. So we've been fixing a bug with our React application. So it might not actually show up here, but we actually have a bug. But the smart contract interaction page, yeah. What it actually does is gives you a GUI that allows you to kind of use the functions and things inside the smart contract UI. We're on version 1.5 right now. If you look at our extension, version 1.6 that I'm working on has a bug fix in for this, and likely be coming out probably within the next week or so to fix this bug because we just had a React issue come up. This is a React application that's inside of here.
Okay, awesome. That is good to know, and we can all look out for that new version. So, I mean, it's definitely nice to know about the other alternative to go into the terminal and definitely just call the functions directly that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always good to know like the basic way, and then you get the kind of fancy way or the productive way kind of too. So.
Right, there's always multiple ways. So yeah, thank you for showing us a little bit of a tour around the blockchain development kit. I think we should probably move on unless there are any other questions. I don't. Actually, there was something earlier. Is it possible to attach Azure Blockchain to existing DeFi blockchain networks? And I'm not familiar with that. I want to say no, but I'm not exactly sure.
One thing I could show you here that we did, it's not quite attaching to like a DeFi network, but kind of is. So when you connect to a network over here, and we'll get into this in a minute here, talking about the Azure one specifically, but you'll notice there's another one here called Infiera. For those who are familiar, Infiera essentially is a service and a group of guys who have built these servers. And essentially, there's a developer side that's like free, so you can do I think 10,000 transactions a day for free, and then they have paid tiers. But basically, what Infiera allows you to do is have some nodes that are running remotely by this Infiera group, and those are public nodes, right? So if you wanted to do some public contracts, you could do your development locally here, get all your tests done, make sure you don't have any bugs or any of that kind of stuff. Maybe it's integrating with a DeFi network or mainnet, a contract that's on mainnet. Then you can essentially use Infiera services the same way that we're going to show how you use Azure Blockchain service. So we do the same thing, right? We log into will basically allow you to set up, integration between there and push your contract up there. So the same way, once you log into your Infiera service, the same way you would just do your deploy here and there. We have time after the Azure Blockchain service, very similar to the way Azure does. But that would allow you to use like a DeFi network or a public contract. I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Cool. It looks like that did answer Ken Fax's. Thank you. That's super helpful. And yeah, I guess since you're kind of already alluding to it, maybe it is time to kind of move on to talk about Azure Blockchain Service and kind of show that off a little bit more.
So before we show the VS Code experience, the developer experience, I want to show what's going on up here in the portal. And so for those who maybe are familiar with the Azure portal, if you just go to portal.azure.com, basically this is where you would deploy assets like virtual machines or networks or storage or any of that kind of stuff that goes around with that. Up into, we call these resource groups. So we have documentation around how to kind of do this stuff from the portal. And essentially what you would do is create a resource group, which is like a container, like a folder to like put your stuff in up here. And then essentially inside of there, I would create a resource. And if you notice in the Azure portal, when you create a resource, we have a blockchain category here. Now you can search for stuff if you know what you're looking for, but you could also just click on blockchain and you can see here's a list of a bunch of blockchain stuff that we have up here. Top one is our blockchain service. So if you click on this guy, you'll basically be creating what's called a blockchain member. So this is a private network. Currently we support Quorum up here, which is basically a fork of Ethereum used for private deployments for enterprise type use cases. You can see that we have our resource group, pick your location, East Coast, so I would do East. You can give your consortium a name, Twitch consortium. There's a scheme around that, and then you can basically so the consortium, let me describe what that is for a second. The consortium, a group of members or a group of businesses or a group of participants who are going to come together. A member is you, right? A participant, right? So if I'm creating a new consortium, I'm going to be the first member, obviously, in that consortium. Then I can choose to invite other people to my consortium once I have mine spun up. And it's very simple. I mean, you just put in the password here. You can pick, we basically have 2 SKUs here. There's some others coming there to make the scale even more. But basically for developers, if you're doing something here, this costs, and they give you cost estimates here, so it's around $100 a month for the basic. Obviously, the more production workload one costs more because it has more redundancy and all the kind of stuff that you need to support, a production workload. So you can choose from those kind of things. Again, from VS Code side, you can do all your development without spinning anything up and spending any money. So you can do all that stuff, make sure everything's working, and then come up here and spin this up. Usually what we see people using this for is like an integrated dev environment, a staging environment, a pre-production environment, and then a production environment. And basically it allows multiple developers. So for instance, maybe I'm working on some smart contracts and maybe Meaghan's also working on some smart contracts. We can be working independently and seeing how they work, but eventually they come together, right? And we want to make sure that we have an environment that makes that easy. So that was kind of the premise for us to build this kind of thing. So we put these passwords in, we hit go. I'm going to do a little cooking show thing because that takes about 5 to 10 minutes to spin up. But when that's finished, you'll be left with an Azure Blockchain service that looks just like this. That telemetry up here for like our transactions, our block counts, all that kind of stuff. We have our transaction case. I just have one right now. I could add more. You can see I just clicked the button to add more nodes. When I go into my transaction node, I have all the different ways I can authenticate. So I can get my WebSocket, I can get my HTTP JSON RPC interface for under these access keys, you can get one that has basically with the API key in it. So usually people will take this and put it in their configuration file for their app, and that allows them to authenticate. So keep in mind, these things are publicly exposed by default, like this endpoint, but they're locked down with some authentication here, basic auth in this case. And so you can use that. Basically, that's something enterprises always need for that. The idea here is, just to back up a second, when we started about 5 years ago, we didn't have a service like this. Like, this is more of like a PaaS service, right? So once you spin this up, let me pop back over here. There's no VMs, right? You didn't see any VMs here. It's basically just like this service, and it has some transaction nodes under it. So Microsoft's keeping track and making sure that it go down, all those kind of pieces that go along with it, and you're just getting back an RPC endpoint that you can use. Infiera does something very similar. I just talked about. They do the same thing, right? They spin up these things in the background, and they give you back an RPC endpoint. If that's not good enough for you, like for instance, if you said, hey, I actually want to run it myself and do my own thing, you can still do that, right? So we have a lot of templates up here. Here's a proof of authority network. Here's quorum in a template form. And these ones are similar. They'll ask you for parameters. So then you'll be more managing things, right? So you have to make sure the VM doesn't go down. You can touch more things, but it also comes with a downside of it's more complex, right? To kind of maintain that. ABS, or Azure Blockchain Service, was created to kind of remove that friction, to make it super easy for people to spin this up, and also to be able to invite consortium members. So in here, I'm the only one right now. Now, what we do is through PowerShell right now, so we have a script that you run to do that. We're working on putting that into Portal as well, so you'll be able to do that here. But for now, you run a script to actually consortium. So that's the hard way, I'll call it. So if you want to see how everything works, you can go up to Azure, you can spin those things up into Portal. But when I was like, hey, when I'm a developer, I don't want to be bouncing out to a portal and having to go set up all this stuff over here and then come back and do my thing here. I just want to do it from inside here. So what I can do is, I already have one set up, but I'll show you both experiences, the create new network and the connect. But if I were to connect to an Azure Blockchain service, I can see all my subscriptions. And basically the way that's happening is because I'm logged in down here to Azure. Now, if you're not logged in already, you'll get prompted for your credentials that basically ask you for your Azure, which account you use to sign into Azure with. And once you do that, you'll see your Azure subscriptions here, just like I'm seeing mine. I'm going to go into Sandbox here, which is one of my subscriptions. And I'm just going to go into one of my ABS nodes. I just have one running here, and that's my resource group. And remember the consortium name I typed in there a while ago? There's my consortium. And once I click on that, you see I get this little guy down here in the corner now. So this is my Azure Blockchain Services. This is my consortium. This is my member, my participant ID, and this is my transaction node. I can right-click on these things and get all kind of cool things. So like on my transaction node, I can copy my RPC endpoint. So again, productivity. Instead of having to say, hey, I have a configuration file in my app over here, I need to get that API key and all that stuff to do this. I don't have to. I can just copy it to my clipboard right here. So I don't have to go out to the portal to do any of that stuff. I can disconnect from here if I want to. Basically, it's not going to delete my consortium. It's just going to remove it from VS Code, so it's out of my way. Now, you'll notice before, whenever I did a deploy, I had development, and I also had this other one here. And you can actually see there's my API key with my ABS service. So this, once I register something down here, it shows up as a deployment target. So once that's a deployment target, I can basically select this and say, hey, go ahead and deploy that up here. I have some mnemonics out here. So what a mnemonic is basically a 12-word phrase that's used to generate a wallet to sign transactions with. I do a lot of development here, so you can see there's some redundancy in mine, but existing, or you can hit generate mnemonic. Let's go ahead and do a generate so I can show you what it looks like. And you just give it a name of a file and where you want to store it. You can put it on USB key. I'm going to store it locally here just for a demo. What it's going to do behind the scenes is create a wallet, use that mnemonic to initialize the wallet. It's going to sign my contract. And if you're interested in what's actually happening, again, we can pop back to the output window. Try to shrink things here so you can see what's going on. Now, these will go a little bit slower, obviously, because it's going over the network. You'll notice when I did the deployment or for the development, it went really fast. This one is actually going over a network, so it's going to take a little bit longer. And there's an actual blockchain here. This is an emulator. This is actually, there's a real Ethereum blockchain running right now that we're deploying to. So you can see that my migration file went up here, and then here was my hello blockchain that went up here as well. And you can see it completed successfully. So woohoo, everything worked. So I didn't have to do anything there. Sorry,
awesome. Yeah, that was very smooth. And then so you showed how easy it was to kind of connect to your existing blockchain service member, and you can also create blockchain service members from VS Code directly, right?
That's right. So I'll go ahead. I'll just leave this one here, but we'll create a new one.
I'm just
So
clarifying.
if you get into yeah, I just want to show people the initial points of it, why I think it's productive. This little ellipse over here that you can see in this menu, if you click on there, you'll see the connect to and create as well, because I already have something created here. I can hit create new network. I can hit ABS again. And again, it's going to ask me for like which subscription I want to use. You'll notice now I can do things like create resource group. So I could say, hey, I want to create a new one. Let's just call it the Twitch. On the fly. Which location you want to deploy to. These are the locations that ABS deploys to today. So we'll pick one of those. It creates a resource group, and then immediately I can say, this does actually validation for those who probably saw it in the corner to make sure you're not taking a name that someone else is already using. Sounds good. Again, a protocol. We're looking to add other protocols in the future, but right now it's just Quorum. We have to put our passwords in, just like we saw in the portal. This, again, checks for complexity roles and all that kind of stuff. You'll pick your SKU, just like in the portal, basic or standard. And that's it. So basically, you can see down here, we say creating new consortium. We'll pop you out to the Azure portal. Because this takes 5 to 10 minutes, we don't hang you up in VS Code with that. You can see here, and you'll see it's in updating status right now. But after about 5 or 10, we'll go to completed, just like our one that's over here. So you see it says available. That's what that one will go to, and you can use it then. It will also add it automatically to your tree over here. You can see it here right now. The transaction node's there, but it's still spinning up. If we tried to deploy it, would fail right now until it's completely spun up.
Awesome. Thanks for showing that, Cale. It's very nifty. There were a couple questions that came up. Let's see. The most recent one was about the mnemonic. The mnemonic is a 12-word phrase. Is it possible to generate that if you have the private key and public key? And by generate that, I guess they're asking, is it possible to generate a mnemonic based on your keys set? Does that sound correct?
Yeah, typically that's typically is like kind of the password for that. So I'll show you a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes here, so you can get a sense for what to the mnemonic. You can see we're using an HG wallet provider here in our configuration file, and you can see, remember I called it core2 was the name of my thing. So basically I'm passing that in, actually happening, and then there's my endpoint for my blockchain. What's actually happening is it's using those 12 words to actually generate the keys. So it's like backwards of what you just asked, right? So typically that's the way that works, is we'll have a mnemonic, and from that we'll generate a set of keys, private and public key pair. And those are basically unique to those 12 words. So if any of the characters of any of those words were off, then obviously you don't know the password for this private key, so you can't use it, right? And that's why we put it when in the configuration file, we just have a pointer to this file, so you can secure that independently. What you could do is also put the mnemonic directly in here, but that's kind of like putting your password in your configuration file directly. Not really a great thing.
Cool, thank you. And it looks like that answers the question. There was also another question earlier around, is Microsoft planning on releasing its own blockchain protocol in the future? That would be cool.
It's a question that's been come up a bunch of times. I would say, and I can dig the link up, we can share it with the group. We have a project we've been working on for a while called CCF. It's called Confidential Consortium Framework. And what that was is, for those who are familiar with things like SGX processors, it's a special piece of hardware. that securely runs a piece of code. Yes, the EVM, and we basically modified it so it would run inside of one of those enclaves, and we call it the EEVM. And CCF is a bunch of stuff that's built around that. Again, it's totally open source, proprietary here, and anything. I'm happy to share the link to that. That's the only one that I would say is close to us saying, hey, we're kind of building a little bit of a protocol there. And that one's still running on top of Ethereum. It's just running Ethereum a different way. I would say that we're not like super interested right now to come up with our protocols and all that different stuff. Just like we do with a lot of stuff at Microsoft, we're very happy to work with the open source communities because, we're pretty good at like running infrastructure and the plumbing and all the kind of like crypto services that go around it. But, it takes a bigger group to kind of build great consensus mechanisms and protocols for that matter. So to answer your question, no, not at least right now. We think that using the open source ones and just augmenting them with a bunch of other middleware and our crypto services and things like that, we think that's a better place to be right now.
Yep, I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense. We'll take one other question for now, and then I think we should move on. But this question was particularly about connecting with third-party wallets. I think the most recent question was about hard wallets like Nano Ledger, for example. And I'm not aware of that. I gave the example of connecting to MetaMask, but I'm not really familiar with how you might connect to hard wallets.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And it goes back to our point of we want to make this easy. I'm going to keep this config on the screen for now, but we want to make this super easy. So you notice whenever I did a deployment before, I didn't have to configure any of this stuff. Behind the scenes, we automatically installed this provider for them. We asked them for a mnemonic. We didn't even ask them to give us a mnemonic. We can generate it for you. But for the advanced user who says, hey, I want to use a USB type wallet, like a hardware wallet, or even a software wallet like Portis or some other ones that exist out there, you can basically come in here and wire up whatever you want to. So if you wanted to use a Ledger hardware provider, you could totally just modify this configuration to use that, and then essentially plug that thing in, and then as part of your flow in your application, obviously you'd be prompted on that device for a pin or something like that to sign it. So the idea is keep this as generic as possible so people can extend this. But definitely, if you think that's something, we thought about this originally, like, hey, should we build that in by default and have options for Ledger Wallet directly inside VS Code? Totally something we could do, and even the open source community, you guys could do it as well. We just thought keep it simple like this, and then for those advanced users, they can kind of configure it themselves. But if there's a big need for it and everybody's doing it, we're happy to spend some time and wire that up as well. We're total friends with the Ledger guys and the Shapeshift guys and all the different guys out there. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that definitely helps. That's very useful. Thank you. So yeah, I think probably in the interest of time, maybe we should move on to talk a little bit about Azure Blockchain Workbench, if that's okay with you, Cale.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. So first I want to talk a little bit about what Workbench is. Workbench is something, so when we've been talking along here, we've been building smart contracts, we've been deploying them to a blockchain. What Workbench is beyond that. So I'm going to pop over to a browser window here for a second, a different one. And I have Workbench running here, but I want to show you a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes when you spin this up. Same deal. Actually, let me pop up to the portal and show you how you create this thing. Just pull up one of these. Created one again for the cooking show type demo, but here basically it's the second one on the list. It'll again prompt you with a bunch of credentials. This resource group's not empty, so I'd have to create another one. It has a bunch more parameters you have to put in because it has a database and all kinds of things involved there. When you're done, you'll basically be left with this, which is huge. Sort of like, oh my gosh, look at all these things that got spun up here. And basically, we have some websites. We have, basically an Azure Blockchain service. We have an event grid. We have an Azure Key Vault. We have public IPs. All this stuff. So what Workbench is is basically a framework that allows you to say, hey, I built my smart contract. Now I need to show it to the CTO or the CIO at my company. And what happened early on was people would build smart contracts, like I just showed you, from a command line. They would do some stuff like interact with it and things like that. They could see it actually working. And then they would take it to like their CISOs or things, and they would say, hey, here's this blockchain app to revolutionize our supply chain. And what would happen is you'd be like, that's a bunch of terminal windows. Like, I don't even know what that is. Like, that doesn't look like an app to me. And so basically, the applications on top of these smart contracts, which is what we call a DApp or a decentralized app, and they were failing. Like, it was taking too long. So it would take anywhere like 2 to 3 months for most enterprises to build a DApp on top of their smart contracts that they built here. Because on the surface, it sounds easy, right? It's like, okay, I have a smart contract, I have a contract address, I have some libraries that I plug into my framework, whether it's like React or Angular or something like that, and then basically I can use it. But the reality is that's a lot of work. And there's a lot of like trial and error there that people were going through to get that set up. So Workbench is an attempt to kind of help that scenario. So basically what we do is create an API that allows you to talk to those smart contracts. We create an app service that you'll see here in a second, which is like a manager for applications that you put up there. We'll do all the key signing stuff that's up there on behalf and use an Azure Key Vault. Azure Key Vault, for those who don't know, is an HSM. So basically, it's a hardware module inside Azure that allows you to generate keys and do signatures inside of the vault. So it's not being done at an operating system level, so it could be susceptible to attacks and things like that. There's some databases that are involved here to kind of manage the back end of like what these applications are doing. And of course, there's some virtual machines, some compute. When you spin this up, application is for Workbench. And I already created one here, but we'll create a new one here just to show you what it looks like. But after you spin this up, you'll first get an interface that asks you to like basically run this script that will enroll some users. In my case, I have 2 users here right now. I have myself, and then I have the CT buyer. When you click on new applications inside of this application, it's going to ask you for this JSON file. Then I'll show you what it looks like here in a second. But let's just go browse. I already downloaded one called Simple Marketplace. Meaghan has the link. We have a GitHub repo with a bunch of different samples up here. One of them is a market bay. So someone can offer something up and say, hey, I want $100 for this thing. And not really a bidding thing. It's more of like an auction type thing where they can say, hey, I want $100 for this thing. Somebody else can say, I'll give you $50 for it. And then it can be approved or rejected. That's the basic premise of the Simple Marketplace. We'll do a JSON file here, and I'll show you what that JSON file means here in a second, like what's inside of it. And then we'll have our smart contract. You can see it's a sole file, just like we had before. And if I hit deploy here, basically I'll create this application. The application's right here, but let's go look at the source. Looks like. So first I'll look at the smart contract. Okay. Here's our smart contract. As I mentioned before, there's a constructor. You can see there's an owner, there's an asking price, there's some state that's keeping track whether the thing's available or not. There's a make offer function for people to actually make offers to come in here, and there's a reject, and then there should be an accept here as well. So that's our basic smart contract. The JSON file that came along with this, if we go look at that guy. Basically what we have here, description language that we created for this for workflows. And what this is doing is basically mapping roles, so like an RBAC type model. So it's mapping an ability for us to tie like an identity to a specific address on the blockchain. And then it's describing the state transitions, meaning like somebody has to offer a product up before somebody can make an offer on it. You can't make an offer on something that doesn't exist. Right, so basically that's what this schema is. Now, there's been a lot of questions on the internet and from our customers like, hey, where's the GUI for this? Right, so I can do this really easily. There's no GUI for it. So basically, we have a lot of samples out there that we've built because this is basically parsed at runtime. There's a lot of checks that happen when you go to put this up in the portal that I just showed you. So if you get something that's malformed JSON or you didn't put something in you should, it will give you a lot of feedback over there about what you should do. But we don't have a GUI tool for this right now. But this basically, you would have to use some of our examples to kind of walk through this and build one if you're building one from scratch. I would say the best, like the GitHub approach of, hey, look at the ones we have, steal them, take them, and modify them, and just tweak the pieces you need so that you can get the result you're looking for. You can see there's one instance of this created, but let's create a new one. And what I mean by instance is like the smart contracts up there on the blockchain, but in this case, we're going to create a new contract on the blockchain. So there's a quote-unquote instance of that thing that lives up there for each one of these products. So in my case, I'm going to create a new product, and we're going to call this the Twitch product. And I'm asking $100 for this thing. So when I hit create here, I'm logged in as Cale right now, the owner, and you'll see that basically this is going to take a few minutes here, but basically what that's doing is it's going to do the same stuff we saw in the IDE a minute ago. But you see, I'm not in IDE now, I'm in a web application. So I authenticated into this web app as Cale, and basically behind the scenes, it went and compiled that smart contract, it went and signed that contract, it deployed it to the blockchain for me, using all that infrastructure I just showed you there a minute ago. And then I'm left with this instance where it says, hey, there's an item available here right now being offered by Cale. Again, doing POCs, and you have your smart contract, but you actually want to show a GUI to somebody like a CISO type model. You expose a lot of the stuff back, like the address of where the contract is, what's the state, what all the different state variables that came along with it. And you can see right now there's nothing for me to do here. Because I'm the owner, I can't really buy my own product. It wouldn't make a lot of sense. So let me sign out and sign in as the other guy, who's going to represent a buyer in this case.
And did you have to invite your buyer, or how does your buyer actually get?
Yeah, you actually have to go create that. I can show you. That's a good point. I can show you where you do that. Again, we have lots of documentation on this, but I can show you. So you have it in the video here, so it'll inspire your memory when you go. Okay. Maybe I forget what the password was here. Oh, that's okay. We'll do this on the fly because you just asked the question. So let's come out here. We can go into Azure Active Directory, and you can just go into your users for your tenant. Now you can see Cale is my main account, and then I have my CT buyer here, this guy. Now I created him. If you didn't have him, let me go ahead and back up here a second. When you go into users, you can just hit new user here, and you can create a new one. You don't have to do anything else with it. Just create it in the tenant, special permissions or any of that kind of stuff. In here, I'm going to reset this password because I forget what it is. And I'm going to copy that guy. And please don't attack me right now. We'll sign in. The new password, I have to change it. And man, I can't type.
It happens. It's okay. Almost there.
Yeah, it's great. So now I'm logged in. You see CB now because I'm signed in as a buyer. When I go into this simple marketplace, you'll notice, by the way, this guy is not an admin, so he doesn't have the ability to create new applications up here. You can only use ones. Distinction there. When I come into here, I can see there's a couple things here that I have access to, and I'll see this guy as something that's being offered, and you notice I have an action I can take here now. Now, all this is basically like we built an app on top of this to stuff works, but we're just calling an API behind the scenes. You could totally not use this UI and just call our API directly using Postman, using your own custom application, any of that stuff. But again, we want to make productivity really fast, so I'm going to make an offer here. And my offer is going to be $50. So I'm taking action. You can again see behind the scenes what we're doing is signing that transaction, that state change that we're pushing up to the blockchain. So what's going to happen is my offer is now up there, and you can see the time and dates the order was placed. Again, the contract address. You can click on these and even see the block cache that we were talking about before. So if you're really interested in the blockchain aspect that's happening here for like provenance tracking or something, you can see that. And you can see our little progress wheel over here. Again, just a component we have in there is moved up, right? Our workflow is now on stage 2. There's actually 3 stages to this one. Now the other guy, our original guy, I can pop back in, he could either accept or reject that. I'll just show that quickly here. While I'm doing that, if there's any questions, Megan, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, there was a question about Azure Active Directory, so I think it was helpful to kind of see how that worked behind the scenes. And so are all those permissions for your users can be pulled from ADS? Yes, they can, right? And that there's 2
That's right.
different types of roles that you can designate, right? Either a member or administrator.
That's right. And the distinction is, you can see I have, basically, if I'm in the application side, remember I got the new button here, so I can create new applications up here if I'm an admin, and if I'm just a member, I wouldn't be able to do anything. So here we can see, hey, CT buyer who placed an order. The asking price was 100. He said 50. I can take action now because I'm the owner. Behind the scenes, this is actually respecting all the address stuff, right? So there's an address map to CT and CB in this case, and those are what's being used on the blockchain. But from an application standpoint, I'm just interacting with things that I know, not hashes. Again, less hex, more text. We see the names. We don't see the 0x5000, whatever that thing is. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and accept it. It's okay. I'm going to take a loss on it and sell this thing for $50. And you're going to see here in a second that the transaction completes. So everything completed in this flow. This is a basic UI, like I said before. There's also an API. There's a lot of documentation around that. It's very generic. So as you build your smart contracts, all the functions, like the methods inside of it, will automatically get exposed through that API. And then you can call it from, a standard REST call instead of having to use JSON RPC and any of the kind of low-level stuff that comes along with blockchain.
Awesome. That was a great demo. I mean, I think it's really nice just to see how quick it can be to kind of get an application up in Workbench. Once you have that JSON, you can just upload it and kind of immediately start using that contract once you have members, and people can get in on actually executing, calling this contract, which is very cool.
Yeah, I think, and just to tie these things together, like how would VS Code tie to something I'm doing in Workbench? Contracts, I can use this. So we usually see that at enterprises where there's guys who build the smart contracts and there's guys who are building the app, right? Maybe they're doing, like I said, React, Angular, all the different kind of modern frameworks for that, but they don't really deal too much with the smart contract. They have a smart contract developer doing that. So he can focus and be very productive on their application side and building that, and they can kind of come together to build the application faster. That's kind of the idea.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then from your experience too, it's nice to see how all of these different solutions tie together. But like, what is like maybe a typical workflow that you see? Like, I guess you kind of start with the contracts, I imagine, right? And then you kind of move on to kind of create your consortium and work with Azure Blockchain Service, and then move on to the Workbench. Or like, what's a typical workflow, do you think?
Yeah, definitely the first part of that. Like, you always start with smart contracts because that's kind of defining your business logic, the core business logic of whatever you're trying to do. And then once you have that built and you test it locally and you're comfortable with it and all that kind of thing, you want to share it with others or share it with some app developers. That's where ABS usually comes in. I say ABS, to Azure Blockchain Service. And then you can push it to there, and then other people can attach to it, right? So if I'm an app developer who's not even using smart contracts, but I'm doing React development in here, I can still attach to that same blockchain node and see the smart contract and all that. So I think that's a piece. The blockchain workbench usually comes in the middle there, right? So I build the smart contract. I need to show it to some executives to get buy-in so that they'll say, yeah, this is actually cool. And I'll use Workbench to do that piece. And then once they say, okay, this is good, that's when I'll come back and say, okay, what's the app we're going to make this look like? Because that thing I just showed you, like this front end over here, is not something that's like a production app. It's just an application built on top of the API. You would build your own application on top of that API as well. And that's where that usually follows after you do Workbench.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think we're already a few minutes over, and I don't see any questions questions for now, so I'm going to switch back over to this view. Actually, one question did just come in, so I'm going to answer probably one more, and then we can wrap this up. But so this question, it was about where do you view the Azure Ledger? Oh, that's actually a good question. I guess we didn't particularly show that, and I'm assuming that they're talking about AlgoCrypt. I'm assuming you're talking about a ledger in Azure Blockchain service, perhaps? That's what I assume. Get into that portion today, actually, looking at the ledger data in Azure Blockchain service, but I'm actually going to do a demo of that tomorrow. Typically, yeah, I guess we didn't really get into the data manager. Sorry, we ran out of time, but do other things with that. So we will get into that at a later time at this point. Cool. Yeah, I think we're probably going to end here. We're a few minutes over today, kind of taking us on a tour around these different blockchain solutions. Like I mentioned, I'll be back tomorrow, same time, kind of doing a more deeper dive into Azure Blockchain Service in particular. So if we didn't get to any particular kind of examples or use cases you wanted to see today, we'll have a lot more time to do that tomorrow. And then Cale and I will be back again on Thursday to build some Ethereum logic apps.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again. This has been great. And if there's any questions that pop up or anything, you have our contact information. I'm sure Meaghan can get it routed over to myself if it's something you need me for. Also, like our open source repos, if there's something up there that you don't like or you wish was different, feel free to open an issue here from the community.
Awesome. That's great to know. And yeah, I mean, those repositories are very active. The team is very active. So yeah, definitely open an issue, get in touch with us, get in touch with Cale probably if you have any specific questions. All right. Thanks, y'all. I think that is it. So we'll see you tomorrow. I hope everyone has a good day, good evening, wherever you're at in the world. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.